Hi guys, Debbie with Heavenly Healthy Gourmet. Thanks for joining us again. I have my friend Deiter with me today. I'm so excited. Last time we talked about bioidentical hormones and all that, and today we're talking about my favorite subject, which is the thyroid. So how are you doing, Deiter?
I am doing very nicely, thank you. How are you?
Good, I'm doing great. Yeah, so he is the owner of Coast Compounding Pharmacy in Oceanside for how many years now, Deiter?
12 years now.
12 years. Okay. Yeah. So his specialty again is in hormones and thyroid. And so I thought we would get into, we're going to kind of do things a little bit different today. We're going to interview each other, which is kind of fun. We're going to talk about the scientific part. That's why I have Deiter here. And then I can talk to you guys about diet and that kind of thing on my end. So why don't we just get right into it, Deiter, and explain to us, where is the thyroid, what is a thyroid, and what it does for the body?
Okay, well, the thyroid gland is found in the throat. And if you feel where your trachea is, that tube, you shouldn't be able to feel your thyroid. If you can feel your thyroid, that normally means it's enlarged, and that's normally problematic. But that's where it's located, and it controls essentially all of the metabolic processes that happen in the body. So without a healthy thyroid, the rest of your body is not able to function properly. So essentially, that's one of the most important glands in the body is the thyroid and what it does for you.
Mm-hmm. So it controls your whole system. So can you talk about how does somebody know if their thyroid is off? How would they know, and what's the proper testing that you would recommend for that?
So the thyroid gland, when it's working correctly, you should really have no negative symptoms. So it's really going to be the symptoms that are going to determine whether or not there's potentially a thyroid issue. It could sometimes be other things too, but there are basically two types of thyroid disorder. One would be hypothyroidism, which means your body is not making enough thyroid hormone. And the other one is hyperthyroidism, where your body is making too much thyroid hormone. Both have symptoms that we can recognize and see and identify. Mostly, in most cases, these particular kinds of conditions are autoimmune generated.
Mm-hmm.
So generally, your body will function normally, and if you don't have any autoimmune issues, your body will usually function normally and won't need thyroid supplementation in most cases. There are some instances where you might be low in thyroid and you might need some thyroid supplementation for other reasons. But the vast majority of cases that we deal with, especially from a compounding perspective, are patients that are having autoimmune issues.
Yeah. So autoimmune, for people that don't understand autoimmune, can you explain what that means? It's attacking your thyroid? Can you explain what the autoimmune means?
Right. So autoimmune means that your body's immune system, instead of protecting you and fighting off invading particles or organisms or toxins, is all of a sudden recognizing parts of itself as foreign and starting to attack it. And when it does that, from a thyroid perspective, there are two kinds that we generally would see. The first would be called Graves' disease. Graves is something that happens mostly to younger women, younger than 40 years of age. And it's basically an overproduction of thyroid hormone. And what ends up happening in these patients, they'll have that enlarged thyroid gland. So you'll sometimes be able to see it. You'll certainly be able to feel it.
Goiter, right?
Correct. That's when the thyroid is enlarged.
Right.
They often will have bulging eyes. And so those would, there's other symptoms obviously too, but those would be the kinds of symptoms that you could fairly readily recognize. That happens to a very small percentage of patients. So that's really not an overly large percentage, but it's still an autoimmune disease where the immune system is now making the thyroid produce too much hormone.
Okay. Yeah, I know some people that have weight loss. They even have like diarrhea, fatigue, and just all kinds of crazy symptoms with hyper. But like you said, with my clients, I very rarely see hyper. It's always hypo.
Right. So what we're really seeing more and more and more is the opposite, called hypothyroidism. And in most cases, it's caused by an autoimmune disease called Hashimoto's.
Yeah, which I have.
And Hashimoto's is unfortunately a disease where it attacks the thyroid gland and the thyroid receptors. So what ends up happening is it's not only destroying the thyroid gland that makes thyroid hormone, therefore having you produce less thyroid hormone, but also damages the receptors, which means that the thyroid hormone you have cannot necessarily bind or even function correctly. So what we often see is patients with normal levels that still feel tired and lethargic and have hair loss and foggy thinking and feel terrible and are going, I'm not feeling well. And the doctor will look at their labs and say, nope, your labs are normal. There's nothing to be worried about. And patients can go around and around in circles for many, many years often.
Yeah.
I think we'll have you explain a little later about what happens in those situations.
Yeah.
So symptoms for Hashimoto's will be symptoms like fatigue, intolerance of cold, constipation. They'll have a pale complexion. They can have even puffiness in their face, hair loss, depression, and many, many more symptoms. So those would be just some of the symptoms. And often, you'll show up with your doctor and say, I'm feeling depressed, I'm losing my hair, and I'm feeling bad. And the doctor will say to you, well, your thyroid is normal, therefore you must be depressed, and let's put you on antidepressants.
Right. And that's very unfortunate. We have such a huge epidemic right now with thyroid disease. And I'll be telling you guys my story soon, but that was me. I mean, I was a classic example of that. But so tell us, for scientifically, what is the best labs that you would recommend a client to get if they're like, I don't feel good? Some of these symptoms that you're saying, I feel those. What do I do? And what do I tell my doctor if they can't go to a naturopath? Because most naturopaths know exactly the right testing, right, for thyroid. But if they don't have the money to do that or the insurance, what would you recommend for them to bring to their doctor?
So most patients will go to the doctor, and the doctor will either do just a TSH level, thyroid stimulating hormone, and sometimes they'll do TSH and free T4. And those two levels for probably 80% of the population are just fine, and they'll show up normal, and the patient will behave normally, and there won't be any issue. And when you look at a lot of the research, it's directed towards that 80% of the population. So that's why, to a large degree, the medical profession says that's all that's necessary. We won't test anything else. And it does, obviously, like I'm saying, work for a lot of patients. But there's that 20% out there, like yourself, that have autoimmune issues. But when they do these large-scale studies, are automatically excluded prior to the study even beginning, so that you never show up in these studies. And for those patients, like yourself, those labs are not sufficient. If you really want to see how the patient is doing, you would need a TSH, a free T4, a free T3, which is liothyronine, and I would recommend at least doing TPO, thyroid peroxidase, because that will tell us if there's an autoimmune issue going on. Also, thyroglobulin antibodies could be checked. There are some others. There's reverse T3. There's a myriad of testing that can be done. But of all of the tests available, the most important four, if you can just get your doctor to do these four, it will give you a lot of information that will allow you to at least identify what's happening and how to proceed. So TSH, free T3, free T4, TPO. Those four tests, if you can persuade your doctor to do just those, I, for example, would be able to start a protocol, and then we can decide if more testing is needed. But that, to me, would be the minimum testing that would be required.
And what I love about you is you can get these labs done, and then, say I've sent clients to you that they get their labs done, and then they send you their labs, and you're able to make them the medication, which is awesome. And you can read it. So they don't have to necessarily even go back to their doctor and find out what they want. I mean, of course, the doctor needs to prescribe to you, but I love that you're able to read them as well and walk them through a protocol. So that's awesome. So for TPO, TPO is for Hashimoto's, correct? So can you explain TPO testing and TG? Because I never got that test for 20 years. So explain to us why that is such an important test to get.
Right. So the reason they never did the test for you is that most doctors look at it as a useless, non-useful test, because if it comes back high, showing that a patient has an autoimmune disease like Hashimoto's, they're not going to do anything for you. So they're not going to say to you, oh, now we have to change your treatment protocol. We need to give you some T3, they're going to say, oh, we're just going to give you T4. And the problem is that 80% of the population, that 80% that fits into the generalized box that doctors treat, converts very effectively T4 to T3. So you give them something like Synthroid or generic levothyroxine, and they're fine on it. So when you look at all the literature, it says, oh, there is no need to prescribe anything else other than T4. Unfortunately, for the 20% of the population, which when you really think about it is an incredibly large number of patients,
Yeah.
when you're telling them that they need to be only on Synthroid and they're going, I take it, it does nothing for me, I don't feel any better, and they're looking for answers, it is very frustrating to see. And that's where TPO becomes very important to test, because once you can elucidate whether there's an autoimmune component, then you know that, okay, first of all, not only do we need to treat this patient with just levothyroxine, they likely are going to need liothyronine too. Not likely, they will absolutely need liothyronine too, because they will not convert the levothyroxine into liothyronine or convert T4 into T3 efficiently.
Yeah, so they can't convert T4 to T3. These are the patients that need to, because I want you to explain, Synthroid is only T4, correct?
Right.
Okay.
So again, it's just fine for 80% of the population, but almost useless for the 20% of the population that will go from doctor to doctor to doctor, year after year after year, with the same symptoms, saying, I'm not feeling good, I'm depressed, I'm tired, I'm lethargic, my brain isn't working.
Yeah.
The doctor is going to say to them almost always, well, let's put you on antidepressant, let's give you some Synthroid or some levothyroxine. And what ends up happening is exactly the opposite. The patient doesn't feel any better, and they're actually, in many cases, are progressively getting worse, because autoimmune diseases aren't static. They progressively destroy the thyroid gland, in this case if it's Hashimoto's, or whatever other autoimmune disease that the patient's suffering from. And what ends up happening is they get progressively worse. And eventually, those that are lucky will find a provider that will finally say to them, well, let's look a little deeper. Let's look at the overall picture. And let's look at your T3, let's look at your T4, let's look at your TPO, let's look at TSH, and maybe some of the other testing if it's relevant. And then almost always they'll find a couple of things. You know, TSH will often be very low in Hashimoto's patients, because that's one of the things we see that Hashimoto's does, is it seems to suppress TSH. And they'll tend to have a low T3 level.
Yes.
T4 will frequently be normal, which is why they're going doctor to doctor to doctor, being told everything is normal, there's absolutely nothing that we can do for you from a thyroid perspective, when it actually is the thyroid that's malfunctioning.
So the T3 is for energy, right? I mean, the people that are so fatigued that have thyroid disease, it's that T3 that gives them the energy, correct?
Well, what I guess the doctors aren't telling the patient is that T4, Synthroid levothyroxine, is the inactive form. It doesn't have much activity in the body. It has a little,
right,
tiny bit, maybe 10% active, but the active form is T3, liothyronine.
Yeah.
So if you're that 20% that does not convert T4 to T3, it doesn't matter how much T4 they give you, you're not going to have enough ever to feel normal. And T3, liothyronine, being the active form, is what makes your brain function normally, what makes your energy levels work correctly, makes your digestive tract work, and allows essentially all the metabolic processes in your body to function. So can you function without it? I guess to a small degree. You know, as most of these patients find out, is that they feel terrible for year after year. But eventually, you know, when you start getting them the correct treatments, then all of a sudden things can go back to normal, and they can really return back to normal and have a normal life.
Right. And I believe even that 80% should really go on natural thyroid hormone. I know Synthroid can be synthetic, and there's a lot of issues there. And I'm finding even clients that are in that 80% that they do really well just switching over to a nature's thyroid. Can you explain what the options are instead of Synthroid that would be more natural?
Right. So desiccated thyroid is derived from desiccated porcine thyroid gland. So it is a pig-derived thyroid hormone. what they found is that this particular thyroid gland is very closely related genetically to human thyroid. So when they are using desiccated thyroid gland, it will have not only T4, levothyroxine, it will also have T3, which is the liothyronine. It will also have T4 and 5. So there's multiple thyroid hormones that will be in the natural form, but will not obviously find in a synthetic form like Synthroid or levothyroxine on its own. So for probably, I would say, over 50% of the population using a desiccated thyroid form, which comes under a number of different brand names. There's Armour Thyroid, Nature Thyroid, NP Thyroid, etc. Those would, for most patients, they'll respond better to it. Now, over the years, even these manufacturers have changed their formulation slightly and changed some of the additives, and all of a sudden patients have said, well, this particular drug isn't working for me anymore. So even within those, you do have to sometimes try and find the best formulation that will work for the patient. So there isn't one solution that fits everybody. And that's why I think it's important to treat each patient as an individual and try and figure out for them what is going to give them the best results, what's going to allow them to feel good, to function normally.
Everybody's an individual. I mean, I have a patient too, a client that she does really well on Synthroid, and she's fine.
And there are, like I said, 80% of the patients probably will be, but 50% of them will do better on desiccated thyroid, and 20% will not respond at all to Synthroid. So the Synthroid is probably the number, I think it is the number one prescribed drug in America. And still 20% of those patients it doesn't work for, not because the Synthroid is bad, it's just because they have an autoimmune condition that doesn't allow Synthroid to work. And unfortunately, they're being ignored to a very large degree. There are a few people out there that know about it and how to address it. And we're part of that group, and we're trying to make a difference in patients that are needing help. And what makes it worse is that if you have an autoimmune disease, first of all, it predisposes you to then developing more autoimmune diseases. So you start off with Hashimoto's, and then you develop rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or some other autoimmune disease that you really, there's no real reason as to why you should be developing, but it's because once your immune system is overreacting and being stimulated to cause damage, eventually it starts finding other things that it thinks are foreign too and starts creating problems. So it's something that should not be left untreated. We can't resolve it 100%. In other words, we cannot, if you have been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, we cannot reverse it and say you no longer have Hashimoto's. That's, at this point, is not possible. But we can, in the vast majority of cases, put it into remission, which means it's not affecting, it's not active, it's not negatively affecting your body. And that's where, a lot of nutrition that hopefully we'll have you explain a little bit more about in a little bit comes in, but also being on the right treatments. So using something like a desiccated thyroid product works, again, for a large percentage of the population, of that 20% that don't respond to the conventional medications. And then we would compound for that very small niche of patients that need very customized strengths of each. So there are patients that really need not a so desiccated thyroid comes in a standard ratio within a range of how much T4 and how much T3 is in the formulation. And if that works for you, great. And if it doesn't, and you need more T3 or more T4 relative to the T3, that's where we would come in, and then we would make those specific formulations that are exactly the strength that your body needs based on not only your labs, but also your symptoms.
And it's trial and error too. So you just try out what you can and you increase it and see how you feel. I do know somebody, which is crazy, that was able to completely reverse Hashimoto, which I'm a little jealous of, was newly diagnosed with it and changed diet and did all the things he was supposed to do, and it completely went away. So those are the rare people.
Yeah, but again, the symptoms went away, and as long as she keeps on that protocol, then she will be symptom-free. But if she were to all of a sudden change or forget to do things that are going to allow triggers to start, then she's going to all of a sudden have all the same symptoms coming back. Well, that should raise an interesting question, Because when we look at who is likely to develop Hashimoto's and Graves', the vast majority are women.
Yeah, I think it was 5 women to 1 man or
At
something.
least, or even 9 to 1.
5 to 7.
It's a very high percentage of women relative to men.
Yeah, why is that?
So what I've noticed is in my years of practicing is that women that are exposed to synthetic hormones, like in birth control, all of a sudden seem to be having issues with autoimmune issues.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, if you think about it and you go, well, what's the one difference that women are exposed to that men are not exposed to? In most cases, it's synthetic hormones. And I think these synthetic hormones, and especially the progestins, I think are one of the culprits that the medical profession doesn't mention, doesn't know anything about, that I am suspecting is a highly likely culprit as to why we see, first of all, so many more women having autoimmune issues than men.
Really, yeah.
Why it's happening to younger women in particular.
Yeah.
And I've had a few patients that were on implantable forms of birth control or IUDs that have progestins in them, and within a few months, probably less than a year, started developing autoimmune symptoms.
I see that all the time.
So to me, it's very much goes hand in hand, and I try to tell patients, if you have a choice, do not use progestin-containing IUDs. Those are by far, seem to me, to be the most dangerous. But that, to me, that would go further, that all progestins should be avoided. That does not mean that natural progesterone is bad for you. It is a very good and safe hormone. It needs to be the natural version that's biologically the same as the body, not synthetic version.
Yeah, because the progestins can definitely cause cancers and stuff like that too.
Yeah, many, besides just autoimmune disease, that increase risk of cancer and stroke and heart disease, all kinds of horrible things that they do. But unfortunately, the vast majority of women don't have a choice.
Yeah.
But I think that's also why we see this increase in autoimmune disorders in women. So I think it is something that hopefully, there will be some way of resolving in time. But for now, what we're trying to do is at least analyze what the patient's needs are, figure out solutions. And, I think now is a good time to maybe look into a little bit about the nutritional aspects of it. So I know that you have been dealing with your own health issues for many years and been researching it for at least the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And you're a graduate from the Institute of Integrative Nutrition in New York. So you have a lot of education behind you that goes into this. So why don't you tell us your story? Okay,
I will. Yeah, my story is crazy. I was, this is going back 25 years ago. So really, we're all products of our environment, right? So as I grew up, I was a sugaraholic kid, a Burger King kid, and I didn't eat appropriate. I had a lot of stress in my life. My parents got divorced when I was 7. So my story started when I was really young. And I think autoimmune disease, what I'm seeing with myself and other clients, is it's usually a trigger that happens to you, environmental. And so, my parents got a divorce. I went through all that. And I got symptoms. Well, no, then when I was 24, I ended up getting in a severe car accident. And I do see people that have these accidents or traumas that happen to them, and then something triggers it and they get the autoimmune. And so mine just started going downhill. I think it started when I was a young kid, got in the car accident. I started getting really bad fibromyalgia symptoms. And I would go to all these doctors because I was not natural. Of course, back then in this, in the 80s, nobody went to a naturopath. And so I would go to these doctors and they would say, well, it looks like you have fibromyalgia, because when they don't know what you have, they call it that. And then of course they wanted to give me an antidepressant, which I went on, and it didn't help me. It actually made me worse. And then, they say, oh, well, you're just depressed, or, you're just not feeling well. And let's just give you a drug like everybody else. So that was my story with that. And then I had a child. You get married, you have a child, and then my hormones were in the toilet, and I didn't know why I was feeling bad with that. And that's where bioidenticals would have been perfect for me. But instead, what did they give me? A sleeping pill. So I got addicted to a sleeping pill for 4 years. And then that did stuff to my brain and made me have more of an autoimmune problem. It was like this drug on drug that they just give you, and I just was spiraling down. And on top of it, I was eating extremely poorly. I was a fast food girl and never was taught nutrition and how it could really heal things. So yeah, as time went on, I just got sicker and sicker. And finally, I went to a naturopath because I had it with the drugs and I wanted to get off of everything. And I was taught diet. So that's how it happened.
Well, it's a wonderful story to hear, because I think what you're seeing in yourself happens over and over and over again. And it's to me, it's very sad.
Yeah.
That you are not unusual, taking 10 years of doctor visits and antidepressants and sleeping pills and all kinds of things, or even 20 years to finally have, find the right doctor or naturopath or practitioner that would finally say to you, let's look at it differently. Let's try and, instead of putting a Band-Aid on a symptom, why don't we try and find the root cause and see if there's a way that we can solve it.
Yeah, and I was tested poorly. I never had the right testing like you talk about. It was always TSH, and they would say to me, "Oh, your thyroid looks great." Well, I feel horrible. So, the symptoms I had was chronic fatigue. That was one of the things. I couldn't get out of bed every day. I didn't even want to do anything. I lost kind of like my motive to do anything in life because I was so tired. My hair started falling out. I mean, just like chunks were falling out of my hair. Horrible brain fog. I had headaches. I would get panic attacks. I didn't gain weight like other people get with hypothyroidism, Hashimoto. Extremely achy. So that fibromyalgia feeling, I've had all that too. Also, I had the car accident, so it was a little bit tied into that. But I had all these symptoms, and they would just say to me, "You're fine. You're fine." And you start to think it's in your head, like. And I had a doctor.
You start thinking you're crazy, correct?
Absolutely. I had a doctor say to me, "It's really in your head, Debbie. You just need to work on your stress and you'll be fine." It was really depressing. And that was another thing. I was depressed, but I wasn't depressed. I just didn't have my thyroid working properly.
Right. Now, these symptoms that you're describing, are these the same symptoms that you see in your patients?
All the time. Sleep is another one. I mean, just people that feel crummy and they don't know why, and their moms, they're getting up every day with their kid and they're trying to work and they start feeling guilty because they don't know why, it's me, and it's not them. And I think once I tell them, you know what, there's a cure for you. You can get help with this. And so I really dive into their blood tests, the ones you're talking about. I do the T3 free. I do the TPO. I never had that. I was misdiagnosed with Hashimoto's for at least 25 years.
Right. And I think you find the same with your clients and your patients that you're helping, that they've also gone through the loops many, many times without anybody really understanding or even being willing to help them.
Yeah, it was rough, but there was a light at the end of the tunnel. Even before I went to school, I learned so much. I'm kind of a bookworm, where I really like to dig into the science of what's going on with my body. And so that's when I decided to change my diet completely. And that was life-changing for me.
Talking about diet, obviously that is one of the things that you specialize in and what you teach your patients. So why don't you explain a little bit from a diet perspective, what are the things that patients should be being willing to do and look at and work on?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is for people with autoimmune disease. A lot of them have problems with gluten, breaking down gluten. And also people with thyroid disease have horrible digestive issues, which is all tied into the gut because 70% of your hormones are in your gut, right? So that's really important to target that. So gluten, dairy was a big one for me. Sugar, because sugar just makes that inflammation really bad in the body. And soy was a bad one, producing too much estrogen, causing a lot of unfortunately, the soy is genetically modified now. Right. So yeah, I would say gluten, dairy, sugar-free, dairy-free, soy-free, grain-free, because unfortunately, we don't think about the grains and the rices and the starches. They all turn to sugar, and then they cause that inflammation. So once I got off of that, and people go, oh man, what do you eat? And I'm kind of a pro at that now. That's why I have a website with 180 recipes that are gluten-free, sugar-free, and taste really good. So yeah, I would say that those are the main ones. Corn is also can be an inflammatory problem. And then also I always tell people, try that first, which would be more like a paleo diet.
Or a low carb diet, correct?
A low carb diet, exactly. Sweet potatoes are fine. Quinoa is fine. I would just get away from the rices and the pastas and the breads. Gluten-free bread is fine if it's a certain one. I love Happy Camper. I'm really specific with my clients on what bread they need to take, because a lot of the gluten-free stuff is full of sugar and really not good for you. So
the starting point for them is to adjust their diets. And that would, over what time frame would you say they would have to do that to be able to see changes in their symptoms?
Actually, if you have Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism, I really believe it's a lifestyle and it should always stay that way. Because the problem is once you start grabbing that gluten again, that can put little holes into your gut and cause the leaky gut, it can cause the inflammation to come right back and attack your autoimmune, your issues again. So I just believe in making a lifestyle. Dairy is something I'm able to add back into my diet now and then. I don't do it all the time. It's all moderation, but I'll do raw dairy. So I teach my clients what foods to eat. I give them a grocery list, and we go through all of that. And then I also, as far as diet goes, that would be it in corn. Oh, the other thing is lectins and nightshades. That is something to be aware of. I think everybody is an individual on that, and there are some people that really are affected. So for example, tomatoes can be pretty acidic. Same with legumes. So beans I know people that have hypothyroidism, thyroid issues really get affected by too many beans. So you know what, it's trial and error. You try it out. You know, if you can't handle the peppers and the tomatoes and the legumes and that sort of thing, then just weed it out for a while and then slowly introduce the foods back in.
Right. So being gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free essentially would be the most important parts, and then obviously whatever other foods would affect them.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that patients would need to be anywhere from 3 to 6 months gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free to really notice a change in how they feel.
Absolutely.
So we're not going to tell patients, oh, do this and tomorrow you'll see an improvement.
No.
Time, correct? The body does take time especially for the autoimmune system to calm down. When it's no longer having those triggers, it takes time for things to settle down and for the body to go back to normal. And that's why, as you mentioned, when you then reintroduce it, it's almost instantaneous. They have a little bit of bread, 6 months later, they feel terrible immediately. Yes. And that's often how they know for absolute certainty that they have a gluten intolerance. And gluten, unfortunately, is just one of a myriad of potential triggers. It could be toxins, it could be environmental things. There's so many triggers that could be making the autoimmune system overreact that, these are things that they can relatively easily do within their diets. And then hopefully, that they'll see the benefits. And then as they go through the program, they will hopefully get themselves back to normal and function back to normal.
I have amazing results with my clients. I would say almost all my clients are better when they just change their diet. And we also go through supplements too. But it's also exercise, keeping your stress down. People that have stress, they get acid reflux. All these symptoms come to you. So the autoimmune thing is like a whole orchestra, right? It's important to do all of these things. And most
part of the solution.
It is.
So what supplements do you think are the most important ones that a patient would probably need to consider if they're needing something?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I actually brought some to show you guys.
Excellent.
So this is an enzyme. So most people can have a really hard time with thyroid disease of breaking down their food. This one is called Wobenzyme, and it's for joint health as well. You can get this on Amazon. It's Garden of Life. And this is great for just breaking down your food. And they've also been shown to lower your TPO for those of you that have Hashimoto. So you would take like 2 to 3 of these 45 minutes before you eat.
So that will help with the digestive process, and which obviously then will also help break down gluten better, and therefore you're having less triggers into the body. But we're hoping to have our patients not be taking gluten or dairy or sugar, so that should not be an additive issue.
Absolutely. The other thing that's really important is selenium. I'm sure most of you have heard selenium is really key. I recommend 200 mcg, but what I really love is selenium is good, zinc is good. Also check your ferritin. A lot of people have very low iron. It's iron with thyroid disease. And so I really like this company called Iden, and it's liquid, because the liquid goes straight into your body, into your bloodstream. And that's why I really love. It's easier to digest than digesting like a rock in your, body with a pill.
And then, of course, selenium is also one of the building blocks of thyroid hormone. So without selenium, your body can't even make thyroid hormone efficiently. So giving some selenium back helps the natural body's thyroid production. Yeah,
selenium's awesome. And there's a selenium here, and it's in drops as well, that you'll just stick in your water and drink.
Oh, good.
So that's great, yeah. So yeah, I would say probiotics are really important, but you want to make sure you get the right probiotic. And then vitamin D is a huge one. You want to make sure you're getting your D3 hydroxy 25 blood test done and seeing where that at, and then supplementing D with K2 would be ideal. So I work with a lot of clients with leaky gut, SIBO, all the digestive stuff. That's really my specialty. I had candida, I had SIBO, I had all that leaky gut, and I'm 100% better with my gut for years now. But it's because I'm really strict. I don't cheat a lot, and when I do cheat, I'm okay because I don't do it all the time. So it's just important. If you want to feel better, you just have to make those adjustments, unfortunately.
Now, getting back to the vitamin D and K, which obviously are vitally important, we generally recommend about 5,000 units a day. Is that what you would recommend also?
I do. Everybody is different. It depends on how low their vitamin. If they're very, very low, I always start them with 5,000. If they're not, I usually go to about 1,000 to 2,000. So
for a maintenance perspective.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, for 5,000, you want to really start building it up. But you have to remember, as you know, vitamin D is a hormone. So it can affect people sometimes a little bit poorly. Like I can't have a lot of vitamin D. It bothers my system. So for me, having 1,000 to 2,000 a day works better for me.
Yeah, and obviously everything has to be customized for each patient.
Right.
And obviously you have a myriad of other options available. Are there some others you want to share with us today?
Other options for supplements
and things, the
other thing I was going to show you is vitamin E is so good too. I have them do 400 IUs of vitamin E.
Yeah, that's good.
There's a lot of supplements, but I also believe you only supplement what your body needs, right?
So you're going to start them on a protocol with the minimum amount, and then adjust up or down based on what each individual patient's the needs are.
And the other thing I have my clients do is I really work on co-infections. So what I'm seeing in my clients is that their liver is not working properly, which is really making their hormones not work. I also see a lot of parasitic infections with people that have parasites. So I do those cleanses. We also work on heavy metal cleanses. As a lot of you guys know, I work with two naturopaths that I'm a practitioner for them. And so I really get them into these cleanses to detox the co-infections, and then they'll see that sometimes their autoimmune disease get, extremely better just by getting rid of some of these infections they have.
Right. And again, somebody that has toenail fungus will look at it and go, oh, it's no big deal. My toenail's a little discolored. But the problem is, like with these parasitic infections in the intestinal tract, those can all stimulate and will stimulate the immune system to attack them.
Yes.
And that's what then eventually, over time, causes the immune system to start attacking itself.
It
does. These are the kinds of things that are very commonly seen that tend to create problems, and why it's so important to deal with autoimmune issues as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, so that they don't progress and don't get worse, and it allows you to get back to functioning normally.
Well, I always tell people your gut is your brain. So everything is related. Whatever you're putting in your gut is going to be coming out, right? Whether it's headaches or a foggy head or thinking straight. And a lot of that can be just, needing some bioidentical hormone or some more thyroid hormone. But food is a life changer for people.
Yep.
It really is.
We are what we eat. That doesn't mean that if you eat pork, you become a pig. What it really means is that if you eat an unhealthy diet, you will have an unhealthy body.
That's right.
So eating healthy foods in the right proportions and in the right quantities allows you to have a healthy body, a healthy weight, feel good, and of course, as we have discussed earlier, decreasing stress, getting enough sleep, having an exercise program, and keeping all your hormones, whether the bioidentical hormones or your thyroid hormones, in balance, allows you to function normally.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I love that we can work together, and I love, yeah, it's great. So thanks for joining me today. I hope this was helpful for all of you guys. You know where to find Deiter at Coast Compounding Pharmacy in Oceanside, and you know where to find me too. So thank you so much, and is there anything you wanted to add?
I'm just very excited to be doing this and being able to share with patients. So thank you. It's been wonderful.
Okay, have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.